Hey guys, I'm Matt from MWA Woodworks, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I made this side table with a white concrete top and a walnut base. Now, this is the first time that I've ever used concrete in a project, and there was a ton of good learning in the process, and I picked up a few tips that I'd like to share with you if you're looking to use concrete for the first time as well. So keep watching, and I'll show you how I did it. So, like I said, this is my first time using concrete in a project, and the first thing I need to do is to create a form to cast the concrete in. I want to create a 20-inch round tabletop, so I'm going to cut a 20-inch round circle out of 3/4 inch melamine on the CNC. Now, for all of you sans CNC folks, two good options for cutting out a circle like this is to use a router attached to a trammel, or you could use a circle cutting jig on the bandsaw. If you don't follow me on Instagram yet, I've posted videos of making and using my circle cutting jig at the bandsaw, so go ahead and check me out over there if you want to learn more about that method. And the result here is one perfect 20-inch circle. Now, for the sidewalls of the form, I went and picked up a piece of PVC base molding at the Big Orange board. Cost me all of about $8. I went ahead and cut off the top of the trim to leave me with a nice flat surface. I then turned it up on edge and basically cut it in half, but apparently my camera battery died and so I didn't get that shot. But the end result is a strip that's about 1/4 inch thick, which gives it enough flexibility to bend around this circle form and screw it into place. A trick I learned from my buddy Keith Johnson is that using a heat gun to soften the PVC will get you across the goal line. And you can see that I ended up here a little long and I got this little hump. I just went back and trimmed that end a little bit to make it fit better, and you just have to remember to put your screw into a new hole to prevent that hump from reforming. Next, I needed to caulk the seams, and I'm using black silicone caulk for this. I'll put a link to it in the description if you want to see exactly the make and model caulk that I'm using here. I'm using black here just for visibility's sake. You can see it better against the melamine and the PVC than you can white or clear caulk. But if all you can find is white or clear, that'll work exactly the same. And you can see here that my mad caulking skills are on full display. This is what it looks like when you overcaulk your seams. This is the good and bad part of using high visibility caulk. But I do have the opportunity to go back and remove any of the excess easily. This stuff just peels right off the PVC and melamine, and a Scotch-Brite pad actually works like a magic eraser, cleaning up all the remaining smears. Alright, now for the main event. For this tabletop, I'll be using white concrete countertop mix from Concrete Countertop Solutions. They were gracious enough to provide me with the materials I need for this project, as well as a few tips for getting me started working with concrete. Besides the concrete, the only other things I need for this are water and this bright white pigment, which just mixes in with the concrete to give it an extra pop of crisp, clean white. Because this is a dusty process, I went ahead and laid down some black plastic and began by adding half of the white pigment. I wasn't sure exactly how much concrete I was going to be mixing up here, so I mixed it a little bit at a time. I added some water to mix the pigment up. And to mix all this up, I'm using a concrete or mud mixing auger on my drill, and I'm using a corded drill here because I wasn't sure exactly how much power was going to be needed to mix this up, and I didn't want to run out of juice using my cordless drill. Then I slowly began adding concrete a little at a time. By the way, did I mention this is really dusty? I definitely recommend wearing a dust mask even if you're doing this outside. Now I went ahead and mixed that in, making sure to get all the lumpy bits, and then I continued adding more concrete. Now it was at this point that I just decided to go all in on this bag of concrete, so I added the rest of the pigment and the remaining water. And then I just kept adding concrete a little bit at a time until it was thoroughly mixed, and once I got everything into the bucket and all mixed up to a batter-like consistency, it was time to pour. Alright everyone, into the pool. But that's not batter-like at all. I was expecting a perfectly flowing river of white dreaminess, not a plodding clump. So I unceremoniously dumped everything back into the bucket and added about 1/4 quart more water to the mix and gave it another whirl. And pour number 2. Much better. I filled the mold up to about the 1¼ inch mark. Now here's something that I do differently the next time. What I should have done is made my sidewalls to the exact size that I wanted, and then filled this up to the complete top so that I could screed it across the top flat. I ended up having to remove a small hump in the middle here with a grinder and flap disc after this thing cured. It worked just fine, but that's just a step that I didn't have to take if I'd have done this pour a little bit differently. And once everything was settled into the mold, I needed to vibrate the heck out of it to get rid of any air bubbles. Now I've seen people use sanders or reciprocating saws or even just shaking it manually, but I have found the perfect tool to use for this, my Theragun. I just added a little bit of tape to protect the end from getting dirty, and I worked the sides of the mold for about 30 minutes. After that, I let this thing set up for about 48 hours before I demolded. Demolding now will allow all of the sides of the concrete to get airflow and finish curing. And you can see here how easily the mold separates from the concrete. I didn't see anything stick at all. And now for the big reveal. I am super impressed with how smooth and even this top is and how free from bubbles it was. Pretty amazing stuff. There's definitely a little sanding work to be done to smooth the edges, but I expected this was going to be the case given my hack job with the caulk. All in all, I think this was a successful first pour, and I am very happy with those results. Alright, now while the concrete sits for another couple of days to fully cure, it's time to work on the base. So I'm going to be making this base out of 2-inch thick black walnut, and I begin by cutting some blanks with my jigsaw. I examine the end of the blanks to make sure that I can cut some riffs-on material from them. Here, I'll go ahead and highlight what I mean. Do you see how on each end of the board the grain runs diagonally? Now if I use this material, I'm going to get a straight grain look on all my leg parts, which is what I'm after here. I'll just cut off both sides to use, and I'll save the middle of this board for another project down the road. To make the base of the table, I mocked everything up in SketchUp, and I took my final design and cut out these templates out of 1/2-inch plywood on my CNC. Now at this point I was still a little undecided about the final leg design, and so I cut out a template for a straight edge leg and another one with a sweeping curve on the outside of the leg. I then laid my templates onto the stock to see how much I needed and set up my table saw to rip my parts down to rough width. I always like using a dedicated rip blade, especially when I'm cutting 2-inch thick hardwood. It's the most efficient way to get through all that material without burning or wearing down the saw blade. I rip down my boards until I have enough material to get all 4 legs and my stretcher parts. I then quickly milled everything down straight and square using the joiner and the planer. Now I'm still going to keep everything to rough oversized dimensions at this point because this is just the first milling. Now once all 4 sides were surfaced, I marked the center of each board and double checked that my templates still fit. I then went ahead and chopped each one in half at the miter saw to give me 4 leg blanks and 2 blanks to cut the stretchers from. At this point, I just sticker everything up and let them sit to acclimate overnight. You can also see here that nice straight grain look that I was talking about earlier from the riffs on material. Okay, next day I bring all my blanks down to final dimensions. First by trimming off some of the excess width using my bandsaw, and I'm just going to save these offcuts for something down the road. I then use the planer to surface all 4 sides once again to remove the bandsaw marks and make sure I hit my final thickness of 1¼ inches. I can now cut my stretcher parts down to final size as well because each individual part would have been too small to go through the planer. So my method of template cutting is to fix the template to my stock using strong 2-sided tape. I have a video of my top 10 favorite items in my shop, and this tape made the list. I'll link to that as well if you want to check out what the other 9 are. I then like to trim off all the waste as close as I can to the template using my bandsaw. A bandsaw is a really great tool for making these finer detail cuts because I can follow curves and deal with weird angles without needing to make a special jig to do it safely and quickly. I try to cut anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 1/16 of an inch away from the template to give myself the least amount of material to remove with my router. Now over at the router, I go ahead and set the height of my spiral flush trim bit so that the bearing rides against the template like this. I then trim away all the excess, starting with the sides. I then like to use a special wrap-around motion to trim the end grain. You don't want to stick the end grain directly into the router bit because this could wind up causing a dangerous kickback situation and really easily damage the end of your workpiece. I then just repeat that same process with the legs and with the lower stretchers. And once all the parts are cut out, I can move on to joinery. For the stretchers, I'm going to overlap them like an X, so that means I need to cut notches out of the center of each one. Now to do this, I'm going to use a dado stack in my table saw because this is the quickest way to hog away all that material. If you wanted to, you could totally use a standard table saw blade with a flat grind tooth and just cut these notches one pass at a time. I keep cutting, sneaking up on my lines until I get my stretcher parts to fit snugly together. Next, I go ahead and lay out all my parts to mark the leg joint locations. I'm going to be using dominoes to join everything together. I can assemble the whole base with just 8 dominoes. Dowels will also work in this situation, but if you're using dowels, I would go ahead and double up the number that you're using just to be safe. Cutting the domino mortises went super fast. I set up my domino dock to free up both hands and I plunged at my pencil marks. Since this is a relatively small table, I just need 1 mortise at each joint. Now, if this were anything bigger than, say, a coffee table, I would go ahead and think about doubling up my dominoes to be safe. After all the mortises are cut, I can begin assembling all the stretchers. Now, since these have inside corners, I'm going to go ahead and tape up the joints so that any glue squeeze out goes onto the tape and I don't have to clean out those corners later. Then I just add some glue and press them together. If your joint is snug enough, then adding clamps here is really optional. I chose the no clamp option and these guys get to hang out here and dry for the afternoon. Okay, the next step is to take the top stretcher and add some holes where the base will be bolted to the top. I marked my locations with a center punch and drilled a 7/8 of an inch countersink for the bolt heads to sit below the surface. I then drilled all the way through with a brad point drill bit. Now is a really good time to go ahead and sand all your parts smooth. It's much easier to do it now than once this whole thing is fully assembled. I will do a quick once over with the sander after the glue up just to make sure that all the joints are flushed up, but having the vast majority of the sanding done now is going to be much easier and much less of a headache later. And now I can begin the assembly. For any kind of complex glue up, especially where weird angles are involved, I like to do a dry fit first just to make sure that there won't be any bad mid-glue up surprises. Once I'm happy that everything looks right, I add glue at the top stretcher and begin adding the legs. I then go back and wedge in the lower stretcher. Now I'm sure there's a better way to assemble this, but this is the way I did it. Then I take my curved cutoffs and add them between the clamps and the table base to get nice even clamping across the joints. And 2-sided tape is also good here for keeping those curved offcuts in place as you add your clamps. And now we wait. Now with a complex glue up like this, you might discover that one of your joints didn't quite close up all the way and just left a little hairline gap. No problem. Just press a little glue into the joint with your finger and hit that with your sander. Well, don't hit it with your sander, just turn the sander on and, sand with it. The sanding dust is going to mix with that glue and create a natural wood filler, making the gap disappear like magic. One final detail I want to add to the table base is to ease the edges a bit. I don't want to do anything dramatic here, so just a few swipes with my block plane will do the job. See, I only removed a small amount. I also made sure to chamfer the bottom of the legs to prevent any chip out down the road. Alright, with the base all glued up, it's time to head back to the top. Now to deal with any inconsistencies along the edge caused by the caulk, I used water and 320 grit sandpaper. This got rid of all the high spots and created a nice smooth round edge. And you can go back and use like a 600 grit sandpaper if you want to give it a little bit more of a polish, but this looked pretty good to me. To seal the top, I'm using Aquathane's M35 water-based concrete sealer. also from Concrete Countertop Solutions. It's a 2-part mixture that goes 4 parts A and 1 part B. Now I don't need much, so I'm going to use a syringe to measure everything out. After a thorough and complete mingling together of the molecules, a little molecular hoedown if you will, I applied it with a foam brush on all sides. I did a total of 3 coats in 2 days, and that's going to make sure this thing is good and sealed up because I got little kids, and those little kids have juice boxes, like, all the time. Now the last bit of joinery to do is to attach the base to the top. Now you can also see here the marks where I had to grind that high spot from the bottom of the table. I marked out where I wanted the base to go, and I double checked that it was center with a ruler. I then used an awl to mark the hole locations, and then I highlighted those locations with a Sharpie because it was really difficult to locate where they were on this white surface. Now to drill the holes, I'm using a masonry bit, and I am using a tape flag as a depth stop. It has the added benefit of sweeping the area clean when you reach the bottom. Oh, ain't that nice? And a quick vacuum to get up all the dust, and voila, a nice clean hole. Next, I'm going to add threaded inserts to the holes, and I'm going to secure them in place with epoxy. Another fancy trick I learned from Keith is to cap off the bottom of the inserts with tape. This is going to prevent the epoxy from filling the inside of the insert. I'll go ahead and leave links below to Keith's videos if you want to learn more about using concrete in tabletops. I just added a dab of epoxy to the hole, and this shot was conveniently blocked by my hand. After adding epoxy to the threads, I installed the insert. And you know it was a success when you see a little schmutz pop up around the edges like this. Just make sure to clean that schmutz off your hole. Nobody likes a dirty hole. To finish the base, I'm using Rubio Monocoat Pure. It's super easy to apply. You just rub it in with a white Scotch-Brite applicator, and I really love how it warms up the walnut and gives it a nice glow. After letting it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, I go ahead and wipe off all the excess oil with a cotton rag, and boom, done. And after letting everything settle down and cure for a couple of days, it's time to join these two together. With a 1/4-20 hex bolt and washer in each hole, I ratchet everything down snugly. Now there's no need to tighten these things down with all your strength because you don't want to pull out those inserts. And that's it. I love how this turned out. The contrast of the walnut and the white concrete is awesome. I'm also glad that I went with the curved legs because I think it goes really nice with the round top. So I know my first shot at working with concrete taught me a few things, and I hope that you learned something too. If so, please leave me a thumbs up below and leave me a comment to let me know what you thought. Also, be sure to hit that logo icon to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I release a new video. Speaking of videos, check out these that I have lined up for you over here. I think you'll like those too. And until next time, guys, have fun in the shop.